What is that? Shameless self-promotion? I actually wanted to start with this video, which is by the School of Life. Do you guys ever watch them?
Yes.
On YouTube? They're an interesting group, and they make these little... So I wanted to share that just as a start because I think it's fascinating. And it expands this idea of community back into history and back into different ways that people have arranged themselves in order to enhance the potential for life and human development. And also because I myself am actually very optimistic about all the different creative ways that we could find to live with each other. And so I'm going to get into some sort of critical analysis of community and the sort of interface between psychological kind of existentialist patterns and social systems, which is where I believe we often find this tendency and conceptualization of community. And my friend Sam has this joke. She says that sometimes I can talk about things to the point where they're not fun anymore, that I'm a little bit of a party pooper, which I think is true to a certain extent, but I also feel like it's important to bring a level of rigor and thoroughness, to really investigate and engage in a deep self-inquiry around these things that are so easy to throw out there, like the word community. And especially important when we're dealing with something that really has to do with the entire way that we relate to each other and relate to life and the natural world and our resources. So, yes, on the one hand, I'm a little bit of a party pooper. On the other hand, I believe that bringing this investigation and inquiry and rigor to all aspects of life is also part of what makes it magical and maybe more effective in the long run. So this is the overview for the talk. First, we're going to talk about a trend I see where people are identifying a problem, both in terms of their internal psychology and in the social world, and ways in which community is often posited as an answer to some of those problems. And then we're going to go through the history of humanitarian and utopian thought and experience and sort of try and break down some of the underlying assumptions that went into that. And then look at the sort of types of disillusionments that have come from this. And then try and feed back how an understanding of the mechanisms of the way that we conceptualize and approach community might be contributing to some of the impacts and disillusionments that we experience, and how having that understanding in the beginning might offer a different potential orientation towards the entire enterprise of community itself. Because I think one of the inefficiencies of community is the fact that we have such a lax definition and such multiple uses of the word. So the 4 different types of categories for the ways in which people use community that I have outlaid here are 1, in terms of demographic or locational association. So demographics being anything that has to do with identity categories. I'm part of the trans community, the Latina community, the Portland community, the whatever that is, the senior community. The other one is according to shared activities. So that's like I'm part of the dance community, the yoga community, the philosophy community, right? There's some sort of activity that we have in common. The biking community. And you can see these are often go together, right? I'm part of the dance community in Portland. I'm part of the philosophy community in Southeast, something like that. The third is around belief systems, ideology, spirituality, common systems of meaning, right? Faith communities. So people who share a certain belief system. And that can be anything political, part of the radical community, faith-based, part of the Islam community, something like that. And then the fourth gets into this area of what we call intentional communities in 2019, which has been called many different things, communes, monasteries, whatever, that I think, at least among my peer group, has become very popular in the collective imagination again, like it does again and again over generations. And so this idea of intentional community is sort of like the rebranding of commune, I think, for the 2000 teens. And this is where we get to that idea of like a sort of semi-closed group of people living on a particular land, sharing agreements and sharing resources. And all of these things sort of, I think, can be placed on this spectrum. So that community is used loosely to refer to association, interaction, and resource sharing across the spectrum. And this can be very, very wide, and it can fluctuate at any given point in time. But I think on this end, you have community as it exists more as like a conceptual connection. Like I am conceptually connected to other people who do dance in Portland, for example. It's externally materially supported. So what I mean by that is like people who come to like a dance event in Portland are being materially supported. The infrastructure, the means of their survival come from things that do not have to do with the community itself, right? You're part of this community, of the People's Philosophy Colloquium, right? You are not reliant on this for anything that has to do with your survival. And actually you're bringing all of the resources that allow you to be here are sourced from other areas. Another would be that you are autonomously providing and contributing to this community. So that's similar, right? It's like you come here of your own, you like choose when to give and when to provide and what. There's a very low level of commitment. You could feel free to come and go at any time. This might be one of many overlapping circles of affiliation that you yourself feel to yourself to be a part of. So that's over here. Right, and I think another part of this is you can kind of like pick it up when it feels alive for you and then leave it, right? Like I can be part of like the Latina community when I'm like really feeling that part of my identity, and then not when I'm not. And I think that goes with, it's like a conceptual connection in addition to being manifested in the world. And then we kind of go here, and there's like different levels of this and so many different social forms that this takes. But then we get kind of this other end of the spectrum where we're physically connected, a community that is physically connected in space and time in the same place. They're internally materially supported. So they're reliant on each other for the means of their own survival. And this is getting more into that idea of intentional community or commune, where you are sharing your resources. You have to work together in order to get your just fundamental subsistence going on. And there's a very, very high level of commitment that there might be stated agreements or sort of social agreements, pressure, and consequences associated with leaving or staying. I think, one of my dear friends who was part of the USSR said that the government there, the propaganda machine, would often use the language of community to describe their governmental system, right? So it's like a community, but you couldn't leave. I think there's also similar correlations with all kinds of communities that have very strict rules about staying, like Amish communities or Jehovah's Witness communities, where actually leaving would mean complete social exile. And this is a lot of the time that they do it, or a lot of the ways in which they sort of maintain and enforce the social ties of the community. And then also on this end of the spectrum would be the community that one community becomes your primary circle of affiliation, that they are the main people who you are with and identifying with and spending your time with. So that is what I mean by community. I mean everything across the spectrum and anything that could be multiple and overlapping in these areas. But I think what you point to is important because we're incredibly sloppy with our language often. And the fact of how easily and how lax we throw around the word community to have it mean, I wonder if I could move this, to have it mean anything from like something you feel in the moment you say, or a way that you just refer to a group of people in a place or doing a thing, to like a true commitment in your life is part of the inefficiency of community as any sort of viable solution to what we're looking at. Oh, great.
I moved it on this side.
So, all right. I'm going to go here. Now, a lot of this began because I went to a talk by Charles Eisenstein, and who I love. He's one of my heroes, and he does a lot of work theorizing about alternative ways that we can do economics, which that sort of systems rethinking at those like real root levels of survival and relationship are super dear to my heart. And it was one of the places where I heard most clearly that he was saying community is an answer. He was saying like, oh, like ways in which that we can like fight capitalism, or ways in which we can create alternative, exchange of goods and services is if we really had this kind of background feeling of community. And I have a lot of respect for him, and it made me think, and I went back and I was like, yes, indeed, in a lot of places where you go, community is often said as an answer to all sorts of things. I'm gonna go a little out of order, right? That community is sort of held up as a great solution to two entangled problems. So there's the socio-political cultural problem facing us, and these are big, big things, right? Climate change, crumbling financial institutions, the inefficiencies of government, how to raise our children, how to care for the elderly, how to create social justice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many examples when it's like, how are we gonna do this? People rely on enriching relational bonds and creating community as part of the vision of how to address these huge issues. And then the other problem that I believe is related, sort of figure 8, is the individual existential what to do with life problem. And this is like, how do I get a feeling of connection, belonging, home? How do I find my purpose? How do I create meaning? I feel like I have all these gifts inside and I have no idea how to share them. Community is a clearly identified venue in which I can share my gifts. Find love, people who will help us raise our kids, people who will take care of us when we die, who will be the smiling faces surrounding us on our deathbeds, who will free us from the drudgery of wage slavery, et cetera, et cetera. There's this way in which community is presented as something that feels really, for some reason, salient in terms of addressing this, addressing both of these things. I think that's what makes it unique, is that it purports to do both. And I think just in here, there is a very common understanding that there is a problem, right? I collected a few theories. There are a million theories out there. I don't know if you guys are super up on social theorists and philosophers, but they love analyzing this feeling, right? This ennui, this problem. So there's Durkheim's anomie. And Durkheim, he called anomie the malady of the infinite, because desire without limit can never be fulfilled. And anomie is common when there is a significant discrepancy between the ideological theories and values commonly professed and what is actually achievable in everyday life. And actually, there was this other man who expounded on this with this idea of strain theory, which is that, Robert King Merton, that there are structural limitations that make the true attainability of social goals inviable for everyday actors. And so this idea, the malady of the infinite, that there are all of these desires out there that are presented to us as socially reasonable goals. And my friends from outside the United States, they always say it's incredible how happy people from the US expect to be. That actually one of these social goals that's presented to us is that we're supposed to be happy and fulfilled and financially successful and surrounded by large networks of meaningful relationships and creatively actualized. And the list goes on and on, right? Not to mention just trying to make enough money to live your life. And so this malady of the infinite is there are these desires that can't be fulfilled, and then there are real structural limitations, not only social structurally, but psycho-spiritual social limitations on whether you can really achieve happiness or creative actualization or fulfillment. And that discrepancy between the two creates this state of anomie. And I believe this is intimately related with social alienation, which also has an extensive sociological and philosophical lineage of people really studying, even pre-industrial, through the industrial, and now, what is this feeling that we have living in contemporary society? And Hegel referred to social alienation. He was one of many philosophers who tried to address this. I just like Hegel. But he referred to it as a psychological state and an object process, and in general posited that the self was a historical and social creation which becomes alienated from itself via a perceived objective world. So again, it's this idea of who am I and where do I fit? And then looking around the options in society and the internal experience being incommensurate with the objective image of what being a human and functioning in a modernized mechanistic society is. And then Karl Marx took this even further, and his concepts of alienation have been classified into 4 types by Costas Alexis, which is economic and social, So that's just the fact that we're like alienated from our labor, which I think is maybe one of the concepts Marx is most known for. But also political alienation, the fact that we don't believe that we can affect government. And then also human alienation, we're alienated from ourselves. Hi, welcome. And ideological alienation. We're talking about social alienation. So this idea that all of these things start to like pull away from human experience, that we can no longer impact economic institutions or political institutions, that ideologies feel separate from us, that we feel separate from ourselves. And then there's also this, Teunens created these two German words, which I can't pronounce, but one is community, which is maybe what existed previously, and one is society. So just this recognition that during the industrial period, there was a loss of primary relationships, such as familial bonds, in favor of goal-oriented secondary relationships. And you hear about that a lot, of people who are like, oh, like our work is like a family place. And, or like, I don't identify with my family of origin. There's this sort of like pulling apart of that traditional closed social system that people were encased in. Both good and bad, right? We're talking about community, yeah, and disillusionment. And the idea that like people have identified this problem, and we're just going through all the different problems, all the different sort of like perspectives of the prism of this problem that people have. And one is sociocultural, and the second is this one of the individual. And even Freud talked about this sort of psychological alienation, conflicts between the unconscious and conscious mind. Geyer is amazing. Felix Geyer, he's this cybernetics guy. And he was saying that it's actually a function of this sort of way in which we're interfacing with information, that the evolutionary cycle of technology is going so fast that it's generating landscapes of information that require new and quickening feedback loops to be able to process and categorize it. And because we're not actively training in this, and because we don't know how, it leads to this sensation of meaninglessness. And he has all these fascinating ways in which it creates meaninglessness. One is that the more complex one's environment, the later one is confronted with the latent and often unintended consequences of one's actions. So both the rewards and the punishments for one's actions increasingly tend to be viewed as random, right? Like we're so attuned to the many infinitesimal intricacies that go into anything occurring that we don't understand our own feedback loop of impact and our influence on things, and whether that's being received well or poorly. And so life has a sense of feeling random in addition to overwhelming. And meaninglessness is not a matter anymore of one can assign meaning to incoming information, but of whether one can develop adequate new scanning mechanisms to gather the goal-relevant information. And all of this is sort of like along with that postmodernization of the idea of self, which is sort of like increasingly coming apart in this bombardment of the ability to be many things and be represented by many different informational expressions and all that sort of thing. And then there's this sort of like basic lament I think you hear all the time about just social isolation, and that it's also structural, right? That social isolation is typically experienced as a form of personal stress, but its sources are deeply embedded in the social organization of the modern world. And much of our daily interactions are with those who are strangers to us and with whom we lack any ongoing social relationships. And then in accordance with the video, a lot of the social relationships that we have that are our intimate people, we're reliant on maintaining a facade of well-being within those relationships, right? If you have one partner, you really got to make it work with that one partner. And most likely you're going to marginalize parts of yourself that would not go along with the sort of strategies you've made of stability with that person. I think it's like the same thing about how a lot of people actually will process with their partner if negative things come up, but they won't process with their friends. I've actually found it's very rare for people to truly bring grievances and issues and difficulties that they have up with their friends. And I think it's because of this, because there's this sort of like pressure on the few social relationships that we have that are deep to keep them feeling good. And maybe we deny ourselves the ability to actually make them more deep and more rich by going into conflict with them. So yeah, this could go on and on. There's lots of ink spilled. There's lots of big social and existential issues facing us. And this is, I think, again, where you see many people have all kinds of solutions, right, that they have for these problems. Most people just have like continued iterations or new insights on what the problem itself is. But there are some people who are more oriented towards creating solutions. And of those people, a bunch of them sort of say, oh, we need community, we need to build relationship, we need to have hard conversations. I think especially now that's really popular. So here, I want to take a little break and do an activity. And maybe you can daydream in your mind, or you can pull out a piece of paper if you'd like. And we're just going to take like a minute, shake it out, kind of like info-glutted you all with a bunch of theories. But just take a moment, connect with yourself, take a breath, and feel in what are your sort of feeling associations with the concept or the notion of community. What feeling does it give you in your body? What images or associations do you have? Yeah, just take a moment and notice what it evokes in you. Maybe there's sort of one predominant image or feeling, and make a note of it. Community, the dream. And then put it aside, take a little breath. Feel into yourself and feel into what has your personal feeling experience in community been like? Maybe there was a time when you felt you were participating in a community. How did it go? What feelings come up in your body? What do you remember about it? Maybe there's one predominant feeling. Make a little note of that. And then see if you can sort of hold the two up next to each other. On the one hand, your associations. On the other hand, your direct experience. And notice how they match up. Yes. Okay, first of all, I think like your kind of description of community as that sort of like background feeling is really accurate to what most people have. And also, most people, when you do this exercise, have a big discrepancy, huge, between like what that feeling is, or what that sort of like, almost if you think of like its ad campaign or its PR campaign of like people who love each other always forever in perfect harmony, versus our actual experience whenever we get around people, is major, right? Like it blows my mind. That shit is crazy making, where it's like, where does that idea come from? Where does it come from? Does community provide the solution that we're gonna meet these like magical people who like we totally get along with? And so does it provide the solution? Yes, no, sometimes not permanently. But, oh, okay, I just have to go into this one thing. I don't even know where it fits. But it's wild because what you're saying is keys into these very ancient, like archetypal psychological structures of utopia, right? There's this utopic vision to it. And like some aspects of utopia are exactly what you said. That's why I'm so excited, going on a turn. But harmony, timelessness, static, abundant, like ample food. A lot of times there's this idea that sex is something like natural and freely flowing, like water or something. And this is across all cultures. All, like, I don't know about all, you can never say all, but many, many cultures have traditionally some version of utopia. Like it's called the Datong, or the Peace Spring in China, which actually influenced their modern reformers for their communist government. It's Kakidin in Middle English, which I can't say. Kakidin in French, Paese del Kakuyanya in Italian. In Flemish, it was Lulecarland. I mean, the Garden of Eden, Shangri-La, Loverland, Atlantis, Oceania, El Dorado. There is something in our mind about this idea of utopia. And what's so wild is that they all share those qualities of something static and timeless and harmonious and unchanging, where everything is all good with people forever. And that is so counter to everything that I've observed about nature, everything that I've observed about human relationships. And yet there is something continuously seductive about that idea. Continuously seductive. And I think it's what happens in this postmodern world where everything becomes sort of like flattened and fragmented, and the feeling experience becomes like a syntactical tag that you can attach to things, is it's pulling on this deep reservoir of emotional association that we have to that word and just linking it with whatever it is that it's talking about. Absolutely. And that's what I think is so fascinating about this recurrence of like a very traditionalistic idea, right? Is that there's almost like an inherent inner conflict around one seeking to use that sort of more traditional view of living together as a way of addressing issues. And yet at the same time, I think most of us are at a level of individualism where we would find those bonds repressive. Not to mention, absolutely, like it creates an us and them. And the closer you get, I think, to that, the more fine the distinctions get, right? It's not enough to all be whatever, libertarians. You got a bunch of libertarians in the room, all of a sudden it's like, who's the right kind of libertarian, right? Who's the best kind of libertarian? Exactly. And here's what I would say.
There's no here so fine that you can't split it.
Yes, exactly. And here's what I would say. This is all just like blah, blah, blah. People have tried communities for a long time. And yes, what you're saying, ethnographic data shows that people feel more disillusioned by their experiences of community the further on in the spectrum they are towards greater commitment, like you're saying, the more bought into the vision they are and the intensity to which they participate. So actually, the more that people buy into community from that place of like, we're the ones, we're doing it, we have the right vision, this is the way, the more disillusioned they end up being. And it seems to be something inherent to groups of people coming together under those pretenses, which is what I want to get to, because, okay, I need to take one step back just because I think what's sort of at play is this idea of like, there are cycles of disillusionment that occur. Like the fact that the more bought in you are to the vision, the greater the disillusionment would be on the other side, is like a very ancient teaching, right? Like this is Buddhism, you know, as well as many other traditions. So there's a sort of cycle of disillusionment that happens, and I will get to addressing what you talked about, but it fits into the context of this model. So first, there's like identification. Whoa. You're like, I'm me, I'm a me, I'm a me, and I'm a special, unique me, right? So there's the first separation from like oneness, and then there's the feeling of uniqueness for your separate little thing that you are. And then you find attachment. And so, like in Buddhism, they would say that the two great sensitivities would be one, the desire to be other, and two, the desire to return. So in identification, you feel yourself as other, and then in attachment, we seek to return. And we seek to return relative to the patterning of our desire, to the context that we grew up, right? Like, I always think, what would make someone want to join, like, a Christian commune, right? Like, what would make someone want to join, like, a roller derby league? You know, all these different types of community. It has to do with the way in which they have determined their life is like this problem to fix, or the world around them in this problem to fix, and they've created a particular solution towards it. What time is it?
It's 50 minutes past. That's right. Oh, but the time is 6:30.
Okay, cool. And then you create this idealization, right? You're like, yes, this will make me feel better, right? God will make me feel better. Roller derby will make me feel better. Being a part of like an environmental movement will make me feel better. And then a lot of times it doesn't make you feel better, right? Or like, what should make you feel better makes you feel worse, or things that should make you feel worse feel better. Like, I used to be part of this like socialism, like democratic socialism group when I was a teenager, and me and one of the other organizers like caught each other at the mall you know? We were like all being like really into consumerism, and then we were so tired from organizing all the time that we were trying to blow off steam by going to the mall. Like it felt good, this thing that was supposed to feel bad. And so there's all these different iterations of cognitive dissonance that can happen, and then it leads to disillusionment. You're like, oh, something is wrong, and I'm a failure, and we're a failure, and I'm suffering, and I don't know what to do. And so then you need to come up with a new identity of like maybe separating from that community or that association or that idea of who you were, and then reformulating again. Wait, what is the problem that I'm trying to solve? What is the new pattern of desire? What is the thing that I think will make me feel better from this position? And this just sort of goes around and around and around, right? So I think when we look at community, now it's not going to work at all.
Down or up?
I think that's good. I think if we look at the process of disillusionment, we can see that the issues that we have with community are inherent, yes.
It seems like there's an assumption here that the person is not going to take the bitter with the sweet and say, well, you know, it's this much of a fuss, but my benefit, what is called cost-benefit analysis.
Cost-benefit, yeah.
Yeah, to go cost-benefit. Like, I have a couple of real pills I have to put up with in that group that goes walking over by Mount Tate on Wednesdays, but, you know, by and large, at least it gets me out exercising. And occasionally a new person comes in the group, I get a chance to meet them, and I may learn something, so, you know, I have to put up with those pills, so I just walk in a different kind of group. And, you know, you just take the bitter with the sweet, you know.
I think this is back to the greater your attachment and the greater your idealization, the greater your disillusionment on the other side. If you don't think that being in this hiking group is going to make you feel better because you're going to love everyone and feel that sense of inherent and timeless connection with them.
Unrealistic expectations.
Yeah, that's that idealization thing. But we do this all the time, right? Community, a person, a new job, a new whatever. And I think the reason why
I'm such an old, experienced skeptic. I don't expect perfection anywhere.
Right. I know. And then I think the other thing is like, maybe you've also learned to let go of the feeling of the problem. Like the feeling that life or society is a problem to be solved. I think it's part of that belief system that creates the urgency to find a solution, that then keeps this whole cycle going, that then makes you want to idealize and project, that makes you then like confused about the complexity of your feeling reaction that then leads to it. But I think that's a much more that's a very balanced way to approach things. Yeah, you're not thinking that like the romantic possibility is going to be what fulfills you in life, you know, like it's going to be some movie all the time. It's so wild. I think people get very romantic about the ideas of community. I think because it has to do with other people, you know, and I think it's almost this double whammy between, on the one hand, you can be totally loved and be saving the world at the same time. And I think that's what they would say in Advaita is like those two streams. There's an inner conflict inherent to that sort of human tendency, right? One drive wants to separate, wants to be me, and actively create separation in every moment, right? Our entire...
The terrible twos.
Yes, no, yes, me, you. And you can see, right, us, them, good, bad, all that stuff. And then the other desperately seeks to reunite. And, I mean, just to go through these different things, I think one of the main reasons why communities perpetuate what you're saying is because they have that inherent dualism in them. They're structured around us and them, and usually us good, them bad, right? So you can't set up, it's almost like that first click, like put something in motion that is then going to create iterative patterns amongst its members, right? Us, them, the community individuates itself, and then us, them within the community. And I mean just all that stuff, right? That it perpetuates the creation of difference, the way we use exclusion, shaming, social pressure, either overt or co-overt, social hierarchies, who's doing it best, popularity, all that kind of stuff, right? It's just like playing out us and them to infinity. I have so much more to say about that, but I'll like cut it short. I feel like you guys get it. And that the idea is that in terms of those two different things, that there's like dynamic tension. If what we're talking about is identification, right? I do think that there are particular orientations or compositions that would lean more towards community, right? And I think that One is this idea of the social savior. And what's interesting about where it is that we seek to find the grounds of both the problem and the solution often means, and this is, just sort of like psychological, what's that word? Like Jungian wholeness theory, is that whatever it is that we have on the one side of us and them, where we're us, we are also them. So you have these people who are looking at the social savior, right? And the goal would be to be a part of saving the world, or in our arrogance, to save the world, which at least in my generation was like hammered, right? Like you're supposed to save the world from all these different things. Hardcore, right? Anyone in their 30s and up. But I think this is the dominant message of the media, is that the world is a problem to be saved these days. And then that also creates failures, fears, doubts of the savior complex. Maybe I'm not saving the world. Am I doing it right? Who knows? Maybe I can't do it. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm not enough. All that stuff. And then this other side is actually this flip side desire to dominate the world, to proselytize their chosen way, to conquer, to colonize, right? All that stuff is on the other side of saving the world. And the other is this personal quest, right? This personal quest to feel fully loved and fulfilled by my life, which means that I will also feel fully unloved and unfulfilled by my life. That's like the fear of it. And then the other side of perpetuating what it is that you are attempting to create onto others is that I will fully unlove and resent others and hate my life. So when we're in these cycles of disillusionment, both aspects of the possibility are in constant dynamic interplay. And I think it's actually like these two different types of people, like when you said people get in community and then they work their stuff out with each other, it's this, right? Are we saving the world? Wait, you're dominating me. It's like, you love me. You don't love me. Why don't you love me? I don't love you. Which is just like being human, So I'll try and take 5 more minutes. And then the idea is that this attachment reinforces that you commit to an ideology, a values, a gurus, a communal view, and you generate this idealized conception of how it should be, which creates this dissonance between the ideal and the reality. And, I think when we encounter this, first of all, just because I can, I think obviously this isn't new, and people have tried to do a lot to reconcile this discrepancy. And they'll offer alternative ways that we could look at things and orient ourselves, right? Like they're like, oh, well, if we came to community with this perspective, or if we said community is about dealing with challenging relationships, or it's about working out our human dramas with each other. Or they'll do sort of ideological pep talking about yes, no, this is the way, this is right, and emphasize the importance of it. Or they'll come up with educational opportunities to do better, we just need to better, harder, faster, stronger, right? I found this guy, Robert Putnam, he wrote Bowling Alone. He's kind of a famous guy. He wrote this other thing called Better Together. He's one of the big communities that answer people. And he's famous, his stuff is on the New York Times bestseller list. He made this list about things that you can do to generate community. Number 1, organize a social gathering to welcome a new neighbor. Number 2, attend town meetings. Number 3, vote. Number 4, support local merchants. Number 5, volunteer your special skills to an organization. Number 6, donate blood with a friend. It's not like these are dumb things, but it's just while these people came up with this really intricate system for mapping the strengths and weaknesses of different communities in terms of development, it's not like they're dumb things, but it's if you look at these problems, right? Donating blood with a friend, and it's supposed to address meaning, belonging, love, existential despair, how to live with diversity, difference, distribute resources, donating blood with a friend. And I think a lot of times it can feel like that. We come up against these times when our sort of hopes don't work out, or our beliefs about how an experience will be is different than them. And I think we tend to either renegotiate the means, we're going to rethink our strategy about how to get there, we're going to rethink how we can change ourselves, we're going to try and do it better next time to get to the same thing. People who had one negative experience in community are oh, I'll just change how I do it the next time and go again and try to make community happen better, which I think is actually part of a natural refinement process that is improving the way that we do community together. and at the same time is like, I think doesn't have as much salience if it doesn't address the internal mechanisms for what we're hoping for our attachment for projection. And then the second idea is I think people will shift the destination. They'll choose a new goal, a new vision, a new ideal that they believe will give them fulfillment. So like, oh, community didn't work out, maybe I'll just work on just my nuclear family. Or maybe I'll like make a big career change. Or maybe, you know, like my mom, we were raised in like a political activist community that was very, very strict. And after it ended, she got very into the romantic possibility and just like dated like crazy for, bless you, like the next 10 years. And it was sort of like she was looking for that fulfillment piece from her relationship that she had been looking for from political organizing. And really, I think most of it comes down to the disillusionment cycle itself. That all of those things that sort of come up as the real suffering and the pain of community and why it doesn't work out are inherent to the mechanisms with which we try and make it happen. And obviously, you know, you can't just be like, oh, stop identifying as a separate being and like feel the permeating consciousness field of love every time you're trying to like, you know, make a compost system work with your neighbors or something like that. But I think what a place where we could work is this idea of sort of looking at the very fact in which we've rendered life and society a problem. And I think it might be one of the greatest taboos to reject the idea that the world or that society is a problem to solve, at least for me. I think among liberals it's really, really almost blasphemous. If you were gonna say like we're not all supposed to be doing something, or like the great effort, that's like blasphemous. You know, what are you talking about? What about climate change? What about prejudice? What about blah, blah, blah? What about killing the whales? I mean, a million different things, you know? And then the rejecting the self-life problem is super taboo. Like if you're gonna say, no, I'm fine, right? What do you do? Nothing. What are you trying to do? Nothing. Like, it would be like almost unrelatable to be that person. So I was wondering like, and maybe, you know, some of you guys are already here and like way ahead of me in terms of your evolution, but this is the activity that I've been doing about who I would be without the problem. Like if I didn't think that my life was a problem, if I didn't think that the world was a problem, then what? And I'm really curious, like you guys, then what? And it sounds like you're also bringing the really valid point, like there are a lot of problems out there too. And like that it is like a tremendous amount of privilege even to like engage in this sort of intellectual exercise, potentially. But I think for me, like if I think about that, if I think of it not being a problem, I think I would still want community. And I would still want to work from social and environmental justice and still want to feel fulfilled in my life, but I come from a different place. Like I think essentially a lot of that stuff is just like we're being confronted with a lot of phenomena and we try and use our minds to fix it. And there's a lot in that impulse of fixing it, and there's a lot in the fact that we're using our minds. And I think, well, who is it? Like Albert Einstein, he said like our problems will not be solved from the minds that cause them. And that when we create these sort of ideologies or when we create these idealized solutions and responses that are more from the level of our mind, we're perpetuating the same internal dynamics of what created those problems, even if it's wearing a completely different outfit. And that for me, when I found in releasing this idea of a problem, it helped me come from a different place, like just more from my heart, less from a polarized view of us and them. Like I think if I didn't think these things were a problem in the world, I'd have a lot more patience to talk with whoever, you know, climate deniers or people who are very, very different than me, and might seem more like, yes, I am one of these like small human beings on this human journey, and I do what I can do and live the pleasure that I can and participate in more of like a great play without that sort of sense of pressure and urgency that, that can lead to such tremendous suffering. And just this last thing, and then I'd love to hear anything from you, is like that I'm still optimistic just about all of that stuff, but that I think community, or whatever it is, justice or personal fulfillment, whatever it is that we're looking for, will occur almost an exact reflection to the way in which we come to it. Yeah, and like there's a lot of people who try and do this with, like Brene Brown, she talked about belonging as an internal feeling, where you belong to yourself and you make space for yourself instead of looking to it from the outside, which I think is great. I think there's about feeling good about what you are able to achieve, or choosing to be around people who you genuinely like as opposed to who you have ideological association with. I always felt like my ideal of community would be like a group of friends. But I guess the whole point of this that I wanted to address is really those underlying mechanisms, and to really like think more deeply about what it is that we come to and why. And it's wild. I love that you use communing that way, because that's how I use it too. And I feel it's like, yeah, that's great. It's like there's communing, then there's communing with each other. And I think what sort of putting this together made me realize is just how much we put in between ourselves and others with under the guise of this community making enterprise, right? We have this idea of who I am, who you are, we have this belief system, this like virtue hierarchy of it, and like, yeah, as opposed to that communing. Mm-hmm. Very cool. Thank you.